had just been discharged from St. Mary's Rehabilitation Center and returned home. When I reached the front gate, my son was waiting there. "Mom, I've arranged a really nice place for you at the nursing home. You don't need to live here anymore." Those were the first words my son said as I stepped onto the porch of the house where I had lived for 32 years. I remember blinking, certain I'd misheard. But then I looked over my son's shoulder into the living room, and something was wrong. Everything was gone. Not moved. Not rearranged. Vanished. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they were quietly erasing you from their life, you'll understand why I need to tell this story. Before we go any further, remember to subscribe and stay with me until the end. Because what I discovered that day changed everything I ever knew about my family. 7 days earlier, the doctors had told me it was just a minor fall. But at 72, even a minor fall came with weeks of monitoring, therapy sessions, and long quiet nights in a hospital bed that I never really felt was my own. I didn't argue. That's the part people always expect to be different when I tell this story. They expect shouting, tears, questions thrown like sharp objects across the porch. But none of that happened. I just stood there. The late afternoon air felt unusually still, like even the street was holding its breath. I looked at my son, really looked at him, not as the boy I raised but as the man standing in front of me now. His expression was calm. Too calm. As if this moment had already been rehearsed. "Okay," I said softly. The word surprised even me. Daniel nodded, almost with relief, like I had just made something easier for him. Behind him, Ashley stood in the hallway, her arms loosely crossed, watching everything unfold without saying a single word. There was no guilt in her eyes, no hesitation, just quiet observation. That was when I knew. This wasn't sudden. This had been decided long before I walked up those steps. I turned away before either of them could say anything else. My hand brushed against the wooden railing as I made my way down the porch. My husband had installed it himself over 30 years ago, sanding every inch until it was smooth. I had run my fingers along that same railing thousands of times over the years. It was the only thing that still felt like mine. When I reached the sidewalk, I paused. Something pulled me to look back. The curtains were different. Bright white. Crisp. New. The warm beige ones I had sewn myself during a long winter, gone just like everything else. I couldn't see into the house anymore. It felt closed off, sealed, as if it had already forgotten me. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when I got into my car and drove without a destination in mind. Not when I checked into a small roadside motel 2 miles away, the kind with flickering neon lights and walls thin enough to hear every passing car. And not when I sat on the edge of the bed, my purse resting quietly in my lap. I opened it slowly. Wallet. Identification. A small envelope with cash. And my keys. I picked them up and turned them over in my hand. The metal felt cold, unfamiliar somehow. These keys had opened my front door for decades. They had been a constant, something reliable, something certain. Now they opened nothing. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something colder. Clarity. I leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling, tracing faint cracks in the paint with my eyes. My mind began to move differently, not in confusion but in patterns. Daniel avoiding my calls while I was in recovery. Ashley asking about the house months ago, about the furniture, the storage, the paperwork. At the time I thought she was being helpful. Thought she cared. Now those moments felt precise. Placed. Like pieces on a board I hadn't realized we were playing on. I sat up straighter. This didn't happen in a day. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. The realization didn't hit me like a storm. It settled in slowly, steady and undeniable. And once it was there, it didn't leave. I reached for my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Not from Daniel. Not from anyone. The silence said everything. I could have called him right then. I could have demanded an explanation, forced him to answer for what he had done. But I didn't, because something told me that whatever had happened, it was bigger than a single conversation. Much bigger. I placed the phone back on the nightstand and turned off the light. The room fell into darkness, but my mind stayed wide awake. By the time the first light of morning began to slip through the curtains, I had already made a decision. I wasn't going back there to argue. I wasn't going back to beg. I was going back to understand. And this time, I was going to pay attention to everything I had missed before. Because if they had taken their time planning this, then so would I. By 8 the next morning, I was back in my neighborhood. Not because I thought Daniel would suddenly change his mind. Not because I expected an apology waiting on the porch. I came back because I needed to see the house in daylight. I needed to look at it without the shock of the day before clouding everything. If something had been done behind my back, then the truth wouldn't just be in what they said. It would be in the details. The street looked exactly as it always had. Quiet, orderly, familiar. A man across the road was bending to pick up his newspaper when he glanced up and froze. "Margaret," he called. It was Mr. Harper, my neighbor from 2 houses down. He had lived on that street nearly as long as I had. His wife used to bring over lemon bars every Christmas, and he still trimmed his hedges every Saturday morning with military precision. I stepped out of the car and gave him a small smile. "Good morning, Walter." He lowered the paper completely now, staring past me at my house and then back at me again. There was a strange tension in his face, the kind people wear when they know something they aren't sure they should say. "I thought you were still in rehab," he said. "I was," I answered. "I came home yesterday." He hesitated. "Oh, just that one small sound. But it carried too much." I walked a little closer, keeping my voice calm. "Walter, did you happen to notice anything unusual while I was gone?" His eyes shifted toward the house again. The front curtains were still shut. No movement inside. No sign that anyone was watching. When he looked back at me, he lowered his voice. "There were movers here. Twice." The words landed quietly, but they landed hard. "Movers." I repeated. He nodded. "Big truck. First one came about a week after you left. Then another a few days later. I figured maybe Daniel was helping you renovate or clear some things out." He paused, his forehead tightening. "I asked Ashley once if you were downsizing. She said you decided it was time." Time. As if I were an old coat someone had finally decided to donate. I kept my face still. "Did you see where they took the furniture?" Walter shook his head. "No. But I did see them loading a lot of boxes. Lamps, chairs, that little oak cabinet by your dining room wall. Even the table. My dining table. For a moment, I could see it in my mind as clearly as if I were standing beside it. Birthday cakes. Thanksgiving dinners. My husband reading the Sunday paper at one corner while I poured coffee in the kitchen. 32 years of life reduced to items on a truck." "I see," I said softly. Walter took a step closer. "Margaret, I almost called you. I should have. But Ashley said you were settling somewhere better, and Daniel looked so certain. I thought maybe it was one of those family decisions." I looked at him and I could tell he meant it. He wasn't covering for them. He was confessing to a mistake. "That's all right," I said. "You didn't know. But now I did." And every answer only created a bigger question. I thanked him and got back into my car, but I didn't drive away right away. I sat there with the engine off, staring at the house. The fresh paint on the shutters. The flower pots by the front steps, new ones, not mine. Even the brass knocker on the door looked polished, as if someone had already begun turning my home into a version of itself that no longer included me. Then my eyes moved to the side window near the dining room, and that was when I noticed it. A small sticker in the corner of the glass. Blue and white. Storage company label. I narrowed my eyes and leaned forward. I couldn't read it from where I sat, but I knew one thing immediately. It hadn't been there before. That was enough. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, my mind racing now, not wildly but with direction. Daniel and Ashley had removed everything too quickly for this to be random. If they had used movers, then there would be records. If they had used storage, then there would be paperwork. Delivery slips. Contracts. Names. Dates. People always think betrayal is clever because it happens quietly. But quiet things still leave traces. And I was finally ready to follow them. I drove straight toward the only place that made sense. The law office on Maple Avenue. Because if my son had managed to take my house, then somewhere, somehow, I had signed something. And I intended to find out exactly what it was. The law office on Maple Avenue looked exactly the same. That, more than anything, steadied me. The brick walls, the narrow parking lot, The frosted glass door with gold lettering. Martin Reynolds, attorney at law. It hadn't changed in over 20 years. Not since my husband and I had first walked through those doors to sign our will. Back then, everything had felt secure. Permanent. I sat in my car for a moment before going in, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. I wasn't here to accuse anyone. Not yet. I was here for something far more important. The truth. When I stepped inside, the familiar scent of paper and polished wood wrapped around me. It felt grounding, like stepping into a place where things still followed rules. The receptionist looked up with a polite smile, then froze. Mrs. Collins? I nodded. I'd like to see Martin if he's available. There was the briefest pause. Just enough to notice. Of course, she said, picking up the phone, her voice lowering slightly as she spoke into it. That pause didn't escape me. A few moments later, the door to the back office opened, and Martin himself stepped out. He looked older than I remembered. His hair thinner, his posture a little more reserved, but his eyes were the same. Sharp. Observant. And the moment they met mine, something flickered there. Concern. Margaret, he said, stepping forward. I wasn't expecting you. There was something careful in the way he said it, as if he had been expecting something else. He led me into his office and closed the door behind us. The soft click of the latch echoed louder than it should have. I sat down across from his desk, placing my hands neatly in my lap to keep them from trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said the only thing that mattered. I think I signed something I didn't understand. Martin didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for a folder already sitting on his desk, as if it had been waiting there. He opened it slowly, deliberately, then turned it toward me. My name was there. My signature. Clear. Undeniable. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't look away. This was processed 6 weeks ago, he said quietly. Your son brought it in himself. 6 weeks. That was before my fall. Before the hospital. Before everything. What is it? I asked, though part of me already knew. Martin folded his hands together, his expression steady but heavy. It's a transfer of ownership, he said. You signed over full rights to the property. The room didn't spin. I didn't gasp. Instead, everything became very still, like a puzzle piece sliding into place exactly where it had always belonged. And there's more, he added, turning another page. I watched as the words came into focus. Legal language. Dense. Precise. Dangerous. There's a clause granting temporary authority over your financial accounts, he continued. In the event of medical incapacity. Medical incapacity. The words echoed in my mind, connecting themselves to long nights in the hospital, to medication, to exhaustion, to trust. I stared at my own signature again. I remembered that evening at the kitchen table. Papers spread neatly in front of me. Daniel's voice calm, reassuring. Ashley moving quietly in the background, as if none of it concerned her. No pressure. No raised voices. Just trust. I trusted my son, I said. The words came out steady. Not angry. Not broken. Just true. Martin nodded once, slowly. I understand. But in situations like this, we have to look closely at how that trust was used. I lifted my eyes to meet his. Can it be undone? I asked. This time the question felt different. Not confused. Not helpless. Focused. Martin leaned back slightly, considering me carefully. That depends, he said, on whether you fully understood what you were signing, and whether there was any undue influence involved. Undue influence. A quiet phrase. But I understood it perfectly. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was strategy. Carefully timed. Carefully executed. And for the first time since I stood on that porch, I felt something shift again inside me. Not shock. Not grief. Control. I straightened in my chair, my voice calm and precise. Then I need to know everything, I said. Every document. Every transaction. Every detail. Martin studied me for a moment longer. Then slowly he nodded. All right, he said. Then we start here. And as he reached for another file, I realized something important. I wasn't here to understand what had been done to me anymore. I was here to prepare for what I was going to do next. Martin didn't rush. That was one of the reasons my husband had trusted him all those years. He never hurried through something that mattered. And right now, every second felt like it carried weight. He pulled out a second folder, thicker this time, and placed it carefully on the desk between us. "These are the supporting documents," he said. "The ones attached to the transfer." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes scanning the pages as he opened them. Dates, signatures, authorizations. Everything aligned with what he had already shown me. There were no obvious gaps, no missing pieces. If anything, it was too complete, too clean. "They were thorough," I said quietly. Martin gave a small nod. "Yes. Whoever prepared this knew exactly what they were doing. Whoever. Not Daniel. Not Ashley. Someone else had guided them." "Who drafted these?" I asked. Martin tapped the corner of the page. "A different firm. Not ours." That didn't surprise me. If they had come here, if they had sat across from Martin the way I was now, they would have known he'd ask questions. He would have slowed things down, explained every line. They didn't want that. They wanted speed, silence, control. I exhaled slowly and leaned back in my chair, letting the pieces settle. "Walk me through it," I said. Martin adjusted his glasses and began. "The property transfer gives your son full legal ownership of the house, effective immediately upon filing, which, according to this, was completed the same day it was signed." I nodded once. "And the financial clause? It grants him temporary control over your accounts if you're deemed medically unable to manage them yourself." Deemed. Such a small word. Such a powerful one. "And who determines that?" I asked. Martin flipped to another page. "According to this document, a licensed physician." My mind immediately returned to the hospital, to the quiet conversations I wasn't part of, to forms I might have signed between medications and fatigue. Was it activated? I asked. Martin hesitated. That was all I needed to see. "Yes," he said finally. 3 days after you were admitted to the rehabilitation center." 3 days. I closed my eyes briefly, not to escape the truth, but to let it settle properly. They hadn't waited. They had moved quickly, efficiently, as if they were working on a deadline I didn't know existed. "What about the accounts?" I asked. Martin slid another sheet toward me. "Numbers. Transactions. Transfers. Not everything was gone, but enough had moved to make a difference. Enough to establish control." "They didn't empty them," I said. "No," Martin agreed. "Which is interesting." I understood immediately. If they had taken everything, it would have raised suspicion. Questions. Flags. But this was careful. Measured. Designed to look reasonable. I let out a quiet breath and folded my hands together. "They didn't think I'd come back," I said. Martin didn't respond. He didn't need to, because we both knew the answer. They hadn't planned for this conversation. They hadn't planned for me sitting here, reading every line, asking every question. They had planned for silence, for compliance, for absence. I opened my eyes and looked down at the documents again, but this time I wasn't reading them as a victim. I was reading them as someone gathering evidence. "There's more," Martin said carefully. I looked up. "The storage company listed here," he continued, pointing to a section near the bottom. "It's connected to the moving service your neighbor mentioned. That's likely where your belongings were taken." There it was. The first real lead. A place. A name. Something tangible. I felt a small controlled shift inside me again, not emotion, not yet. Direction. "Can we access it?" I asked. Martin considered for a moment. "Not directly. Not without proof that the contents still legally belong to you. But we can request records." Request. Not take. Not yet. That was fine. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I leaned back slightly, my voice calm, steady. "Then we start there," I said. Martin watched me for a moment, something almost like approval in his expression. "You're handling this very well," he said. I gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "No," I replied softly. "I'm just handling it differently than they expected." And that was going to matter. I left Martin's office with a copy of everything. Not because I needed to read it again, but because I needed to hold it. To feel the weight of what had been done, not as something abstract but as something real. Outside, the air felt sharper, clearer. I sat in my car, placing the folder carefully on the passenger seat. For a moment, I didn't start the engine. I just looked at it. Paper, ink, signatures. Such simple things to dismantle a life. But simple things could also be used to rebuild one. I reached for my phone and glanced at the time. Still early. The day hadn't fully unfolded yet, which meant I had an advantage. They wouldn't expect me to move this quickly. I started the car. The address of the storage company was printed clearly on one of the documents. About 20 minutes away, on the edge of an industrial area I rarely visited. As I drove, I noticed how calm I felt. Not numb. Not overwhelmed. Focused. That surprised me. I had always believed that if something like this ever happened, I would break. That betrayal, especially from family, would come like a storm, loud and impossible to stand against. But this wasn't a storm. It was something quieter. And I was learning how to move within it. The storage facility came into view as I turned off the main road. Long rows of metal units, a gated entrance, a small office near the front. Functional. Impersonal. Perfect for hiding things in plain sight. I parked and stepped out, taking in the surroundings before walking toward the office. A man in his 40s stood behind the counter, looking up as the door chimed softly when I entered. "Can I help you?" he asked. His tone was neutral. Routine. Good. I gave a small, polite smile. I believe some items belonging to me were recently placed in storage here. I'd like to confirm that. He nodded slowly. "Do you have a unit number or a name on the account?" "Daniel Collins," I said. There was the briefest flicker of recognition as he turned to his computer and began typing. That told me enough. He found it. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "We've got a unit under that name. Rented about 5 weeks ago." 5 weeks. Right in the middle of everything. Would it be possible for me to see it? I asked. He hesitated. Company policy was already forming behind his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "Only the account holder can authorize access." Of course. I expected that. I nodded, as if that answer didn't matter. "Understood," I said calmly. "Then perhaps you can help me with something else." He looked at me again, curious now. I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the document Martin had given me. The one listing the storage company and the transfer details. I placed it gently on the counter. "I'm not here to cause any trouble," I said. "I just need information." His eyes dropped to the paper. And as he began to read, I saw something change in his expression. Not alarm. Not resistance. Recognition. Which meant one thing. This wasn't the first time he'd seen a situation like this. And that was about to work in my favor. He didn't speak right away. His eyes moved slowly across the document, lingering on the signatures, the dates, the legal language. I watched him carefully, not pressing, not rushing. Silence, I had learned, often revealed more than questions. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. More cautious, but also more human. "You're saying this was done without your full understanding?" he asked. I held his gaze. "I'm saying I trusted my son." That was enough. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose as if weighing something internally. Policy against instinct, rules against what felt right. "I can't give you access to the unit," he said. "Not without authorization." "I understand. But," he added, lowering his voice just a fraction, "I can tell you what came in." That was all I needed. I nodded once. He turned his monitor slightly, not enough for me to see everything, but enough for him to scroll through the records. 2 deliveries, he said. Same week. Furniture, boxed items, personal belongings. Looks like a full household. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression still. Was anything removed? I asked. He checked again. No. Everything's still there. Still there. Not sold. Not discarded. Stored. Hidden. Preserved. That told me something important. They weren't trying to erase my life completely. They were containing it. Putting it somewhere out of reach. But not out of existence. Is the unit active? I asked. Yes. Paid up. He gave a small, almost reluctant nod. 6 months in advance. Of course. Time. They had bought themselves time. I let that settle for a moment before asking the question that mattered most. Who signed the rental agreement? He hesitated again, but only briefly this time. Daniel Collins, he said. Then after a pause, and Ashley Collins listed as secondary contact. I nodded slowly. That confirmed everything. This wasn't one person making a bad decision. This was a partnership. Carefully aligned. Carefully executed. I reached for the document on the counter and slid it back into my bag. Thank you, I said. He studied me for a moment. You're handling this better than most people would. I allowed a faint smile. Most people don't expect it, I replied. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. If you're planning to challenge this, he said, you might want to move quickly. Once ownership lines get reinforced, it becomes harder to unwind. Reinforced. I paused at the door, then looked back at him. Thank you, I said again, more deliberately this time, because he had just given me something more valuable than access. Urgency. I stepped outside into the bright midday light, the air warm against my skin. For a moment I stood still, letting everything align. The house, the documents, the storage unit, the timeline. There were no more missing pieces. Just steps. Clear. Sequential. I walked back to my car, opened the door and placed my bag carefully on the seat. Then I sat behind the wheel and allowed myself one long, steady breath. They thought they had secured everything, locked it away, made it official. But they had made one mistake. They had assumed I wouldn't follow the details. I started the engine, and for the first time since this began, I knew exactly where I was going next. Back to Martin. 'Cause now, I wasn't just uncovering the truth. I was ready to use it. Martin was already waiting when I returned. This time there was no small talk. No careful easing into the conversation. He looked at me once, then at the expression on my face and understood. You found something, he said. I placed my bag on his desk and took out the documents, along with the notes I had made in the car. Everything is in storage, I said. Nothing has been sold. Nothing has been discarded. Martin's eyes sharpened. That helps. It was all moved within the same week, I continued. Paid 6 months in advance. Both Daniel and Ashley are listed. He nodded slowly, already thinking ahead. That shows coordination. Planning. Yes, I said. Not panic. Not necessity. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands together. Good. That strengthens our position. Our position. I sat down across from him, feeling something settle firmly inside me. Not uncertainty. Not fear. Structure. What do we do next? I asked. Martin didn't hesitate this time. We challenged the transfer, he said, on the grounds of undue influence and lack of informed consent. The words felt clinical, but behind them I understood the strategy. We show that you didn't fully understand what you were signing, he continued, and that the timing, right before your hospitalization, raises serious concerns about intent. And the financial control? I asked. We challenge that as well, especially if we can demonstrate that it was activated without proper justification. I nodded. Step by step. Not emotional. Precise. What about the storage? I asked. That works in your favor, he said. It shows they didn't treat the property as entirely theirs yet. It suggests transition, not completion. Meaning, they acted too soon, I said quietly. Martin gave a faint smile. Exactly. I let that sink in. For all their planning, for all their careful timing, they had left something unfinished. Something reversible. Martin turned the folder toward himself and began making notes. We'll file an immediate petition, he said. Request a temporary injunction to freeze any further transfers or actions related to the property and accounts. Freeze. Stop everything where it stood. How long? I asked. A few days for the initial response, he said. Longer for the full case. But once it's filed, they'll know. I considered that for a moment. They'll expect me to confront them, I said. Yes. They'll expect anger. Most likely. I leaned back slightly, my voice calm. But I won't. Martin looked up at me again, studying me more carefully this time. Good, he said. Because control is going to matter here. Control. That word again. Felt different now. Stronger. I stood up slowly, smoothing my sleeve without thinking. File it, I said. Martin nodded. I will. As I turned to leave, I paused at the door. They think this is finished, I said, almost to myself. Martin didn't respond immediately. Then quietly he said, that's usually when people make their biggest mistake. I stepped outside, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. For a moment I stood there, letting the warmth settle against my skin. They believed they had taken everything. The house, the control, the future. But they had overlooked something simple. I hadn't reacted the way they planned. Now, it was too late for them to adjust. They found out 3 days later. Not from me. From the court. Martin's petition moved faster than I expected. By the time Daniel called, the temporary injunction had already been filed and approved. The house, the accounts, the storage unit, everything was frozen. For the first time since this began, they couldn't move anything. They couldn't hide anything. They couldn't touch anything. I let the phone ring twice before answering. Mom. Daniel's voice was tight, controlled, but strained in a way I had never heard before. What is this? I just got a notice. I know, I said calmly. A pause. Then, you didn't have to do this, he continued quickly. We were trying to help you. You weren't safe living alone. We made arrangements. Good arrangements. Arrangements. I had heard that word before. I didn't agree to give you my house, I replied. You signed the papers, he said, sharper now. You knew what you were doing. No, I said quietly. I trusted you. Silence. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could almost hear him recalculating, shifting from explanation to defense. You're overreacting, he said finally. This doesn't have to turn into something bigger. It already has, I answered. And then I ended the call. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. Because this was no longer a conversation. It was a case. The hearing came sooner than I expected. I sat beside Martin in a quiet courtroom, the same folder of documents now organized, indexed, and ready. Across the room, Daniel and Ashley sat with their attorney. They didn't look at me at first. But when they did, I saw it clearly. Not guilt. Not even regret. Surprise. They hadn't expected this version of me. The proceedings were calm. Methodical. Every document laid out. Every timeline clarified. Martin spoke with precision, presenting the sequence exactly as it had happened. How the transfer was signed shortly before my fall. How financial control was activated during my hospitalization. How my belongings were removed without my knowledge. Then came the part that mattered most. My testimony. I stood slowly, steadying myself before speaking. I was not forced, I said. No one raised their voice. No one threatened me. A brief pause. But I was not informed, I continued. And I did not understand that I was giving up my home. I believed I was signing documents to help my son manage things temporarily while I recovered. The room was completely still. Because the truth didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be clear. The ruling came 2 days later. The transfer of ownership voided. The financial authority revoked. Full control of the property and accounts returned to me. Just like that. Not because of emotion. Not because of sympathy. Because of evidence. Because of timing. Because of intent. I returned to the house a week later. This time no one was waiting on the porch. The door opened with my key. The same key that had once felt useless in my hand. Inside, the space was empty but not unfamiliar. Not lost. Just waiting. The furniture would be returned. The accounts restored. Everything would take time to settle back into place. But that didn't matter. Because something far more important had already been restored. Not the house. Not the money. Control. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the sound echoing softly through the empty rooms. For a moment I stood there, letting the silence settle. Then I walked forward. Slowly. Deliberately. This time not as someone who had been erased, but as someone who had chosen to return. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new stories.